Saeculum Obscurum et de Dignitate Hominis. Part 1. The Awakening. For 1,000 years, the world lay in ruin. Not the ruin of earthquake or pestilence, but something far more insidious. The systematic destruction of human thought itself. In time, what little remained of the poor fellow soldiers of wisdom and the light of truth, whom history would misremember as mere Knights Templar, grew into something their martyred brothers could scarcely have imagined. They had no name, for names could be hunted, recorded, extinguished. But in the shadows of collapsing civilization, they became the Watchers, the Unnamed, what terrified man would later whisper as Illuminati. The monastery of San Michele stood like a defiant fist thrust against the Tuscan sky, perched upon the cliffs that had witnessed the death of reason, and now, perhaps, would witness its resurrection. Within its library, that most dangerous of arsenals, Brother Alessandro sat motionless before a table laden with documents that should not exist. At the entrance archway, his wife Lucia stood in quiet desperation, her hands clasped before her as she addressed the woman who guarded the fortress of forbidden knowledge. Sister Margherita, though sister, was merely a convenient fiction for a woman who had long ago abandoned faith for philosophy, regarded Lucia with eyes that had seen too much, understood even more. She was one of the philosopher women, as rare and precious as the text they protected, scholars forced to hide their brilliance beneath the cowl of religious devotion. "How is he?" Lucia's voice trembled, not from fear, but from the recognition that she was asking a question to which she already knew the answer. Sister Margherita's expression flickered between gravity and something that might have been exultation. "He has just discovered," she said slowly, each word weighted with the burden of truth, "that Rome has kept the world burning dead for 1,000 years. A pause. The wind outside seemed to still itself, as if the very elements waited for what came next. Then, inexplicably, terribly, Sister Margherita smiled. "He will never be the same." Part 2. The Letters of Damnation. Alessandro's hands, those instruments of devotion that had once traced prayers, that had illuminated manuscripts glorifying a God he no longer believed in, now trembled over 3 collections of letters. Each bundle was bound in different colors of ribbon: black, crimson, and gold. The unholy trinity of revelation. His eyes reddened from hours of reading by candlelight, fixed upon the first bundle. Surveillance. The black-ribboned letters spoke in the voices of confessors, those supposed shepherds of souls who had been, in truth, Rome's most insidious spies. Alessandro read with mounting horror as the documents revealed a system of such breathtaking cynicism that it made Machiavelli seem like a naive child. The Fourth Lateran Council, Anno Domini 1215. One letter begun, written in the precise hand of a Vatican scribe. Hath decreed that every Christian soul must confess their sins annually to their parish priest. His Holiness is most pleased, for we have thereby created a web of intelligence that would make the Persian satraps weep with envy. But it was not merely the mandating of confession that struck Alessandro like a blade to the heart. It was the systematic, methodical deployment of this spiritual intimacy as a weapon of total control. The letters detailed it all. How village priests reported to bishops, bishops to cardinals, cardinals to the Holy See. How every whispered doubt, every questioning thought, every spark of intellectual curiosity was catalogued, tracked, and ultimately extinguished. Brother Petrus reports that the merchant Giovanni had questioned the doctrine of transubstantiation. Read one dispatch from 1278. He had confessed his doubt, thinking it a sin to be absolved. The Holy Office shall visit him forthwith. His books shall burn. He shall recant, or follow them into the flames. Letter after letter, century after century, the same pattern. Confession as surveillance, absolution as interrogation, the sanctity of the soul perverted into an instrument of tyranny. Alessandro found his rage building, not the hot anger of passion, but the cold, terrible fury of absolute clarity. Here was Foucault's insight, anticipated by 5 centuries, that confession was never about salvation, but about power, that the Church had invented the most intimate form of surveillance imaginable, had programmed and weaponized the human conscience itself, had turned the soul into a spy against its own mind. Burned for asking why the stars move, one entry read. Burned for possessing a book of Aristotle in translation. Burned for the heresy of suggesting that the earth might not be center of all creation. Philosophers, community leaders, physicians who dared to dissect the human body, all betrayed by their own whispered doubts in the confessional, all condemned by their own spiritual vulnerability. 100 million dead. Alessandro's hands moved to the crimson-ribboned bundle. As he untied it, he understood why it was the color of blood. These letters were different. These were written by popes themselves, cardinals of the highest rank, men who had signed death warrants by the thousand, and then, in the privacy of their chambers, had broken. The letters reeked of terror, not the fear of God's judgment, but something far more corrosive, the fear of history's judgment. The terrible knowledge of what they had done. I wake screaming, wrote Pope Innocent IV in 1252, in a letter never meant for any eyes but his confessors. A confession from a confessor, rich in irony. I see them all, the faces, the Cathars of Beziers, 20,000 souls, they say. Do I think it more? Kill them all. God will know his own. My legate proclaimed, I authorize this. I, the vicar of Christ, I authorize the murder of an entire city. The letter spoke of numbers that numbed the mind. The Albigensian Crusade, perhaps 1 million dead. The Baltic Crusades, the subjugation of the Slavs. The Inquisition's slow burn across Europe. Not tens of thousands, but millions across centuries. The suppression of the Waldensians. The destruction of the Bogomils. The systematic extermination of any group that dared to read scripture without Rome's interpretation, that dared to think without Rome's permission. We have burned the midwives, another pope wrote, his hand shaking so violently the ink had splattered, calling them witches. We had burned the healers, calling them servants of Satan. We have burned women who could read, calling them unnatural. How many? Cardinal Benedetti estimates 9 million women alone across 4 centuries. 9 million! And for what? Because they threatened our authority with knowledge, with healing, with the simple act of literacy? Alessandro's felt bile rise from his throat. 9 million women. And that was but one category among the countless dead. The letters revealed the mathematics of atrocity. Conservative estimates suggested that between the year 500 and 1500, the Church had been directly or indirectly responsible for over 100 million deaths. 100 million minds that might have discovered, created, questioned, advanced. 100 million souls sacrificed on the altar of institutional power, who dared to call itself holy. We are murderers, wrote a dying cardinal in 1487. Dressed in the finery of holiness, we have created a dark age, not through ignorance, but through the systematic murder of anyone who sought to end it. God forgive us, God forgive us, God forgive us. Though I no longer believe in God. So I suppose there will be no forgiveness to be had. Part 3. The Watchers. With shaking hands, Alessandro reached for the final bundle, bound in gold ribbon. These letters were different in character, written in codes that he had spent months learning to decipher, using keys hidden in musical notations, in the patterns of seemingly decorative marginalia, in poetry that was not poetry at all. Renaissance. The rebirth.
We have waited long enough.
The first letter begun, dated 1301, written in a cipher that Alessandro now recognized as the mark of the family. Those whom history would know as the Medici, though their role in the Great Awakening would be carefully obscured.
The time approaches when we must act. We cannot continue to merely preserve. We must catalyze. We must gather the gifted, protect them, give them the tools and time to create. And trust that they will, collectively, reignite the flame of human genius.
The letters revealed a network of staggering complexity. Cells in Venice, operating through the printing houses that would make knowledge impossible to suppress. Cells in Genoa, using merchant ships to smuggle not just goods, but books, ideas, scholars fleeing persecution. Cells in Milan, Naples, Florence, each working independently, each knowing only fragments of the greater design, each protecting, nurturing, facilitating.
We have secured the poet Dante,
one letter reported with barely concealed triumph.
His work shall survive. The Divine Comedy shall show them that hell is not beneath the earth, but in the minds of those who would keep humanity ignorant. We have given him patronage, protection, and most precious of all, time to write.
Another.
Petrarch is ours. His humanism shall be the solvent that dissolves their scholastic chains. We have arranged for him to discover Cicero's letters. Discovered, as if by accident, though we have preserved them through 10 generations for precisely this moment. Giotto's paintings must survive,
urged another urgent missive.
He paints the human face with such dignity, such individual character, he reminds people that they are not worms, but beings of profound worth. The family has commissioned him for works that will be seen by thousands. Each face he paints is an argument against their doctrine of worthlessness.
The letter spoke of a philosophy, patience, wed to purpose.
The Illuminati, the Unnamed, the Watchers, whatever they called themselves in their many cells,
shared a singular conviction. Genius could not be forced, only fostered. The Renaissance could not be commanded into being. It had to emerge organically, like spring after a long winter. We protect them as they sleep, one letter explained. These seeds of genius, we give them soil, patronage. We give them light, access to forbidden texts. We give them water, the freedom to think, to question, to create. And then we wait, trusting that when enough seeds have sprouted, when enough flowers have bloomed, the garden will transform the wasteland around it. Alessandro read of narrow escapes, of scholars smuggled out of burning cities in wine barrels, of manuscripts copied in secret and distributed through networks that would have impressed any Persian spy master. He read of martyrs too, watchers who had been discovered and died without revealing the network, who went to their deaths protecting not themselves, but the future.
Brother Marcus was taken by the Inquisition in Toulouse,
one grim letter reported.
He knew the names of 47 protected scholars, the locations of 12 hidden libraries, the identities of the family members in 4 cities. Under torture,
he revealed nothing. They burned him as a heretic. He died protecting the Renaissance that he would never live to see. His sacrifice shall not be forgotten. But the letters also revealed something else, something that made Alessandro's heart race with a feeling he had almost forgotten. Hope.
They are emerging.
A letter from 1450 announced with barely contained joy.
Faster now. Leonardo da Vinci, still a child, but already showing signs of that divine curiosity we have waited centuries to see return.
The astrologers are waiting for a child they named Michelangelo. The critical mass approaches. When there are enough of them, when the gifted begin to find each other, to collaborate, to build upon each other's work, then the world will truly awaken.
We have protected individuals,
another letter summarized.
But they will create a movement. We have preserved fragments of knowledge, but they will create a revolution of thought. Our task nears completion. Soon we will not be needed. Soon genius will protect genius. Soon humanity will remember what it was always meant to be.
Part 4. The Last Watcher. Alessandro looked up from the letters as dawn light began to filter through the library's ancient windows. Sister Margherita stood in the doorway, and beside her now was Lucia, his wife, who had waited through the night for him to complete his terrible education.
You understand now,
Sister Margherita said.
It was not a question.
Alessandro nodded slowly, his mind reeling with the implications. The Renaissance. It wasn't random. It wasn't just a cultural shift or the rediscovery of classical texts. It was engineered, no, cultivated, protected, nurtured by people who waited in shadows for 1,000 years.
We are the descendants of those watchers, Sister Margherita confirmed. Fewer now. The Renaissance succeeded beyond our ancestors' wildest hopes. Once we helped the printing press to emerge, once knowledge became impossible to suppress completely, our role diminished. We became archivists rather than active protectors, keepers of the true history rather than the makers of it.
But the work isn't done, Lucia spoke for the first time, and Alessandro heard in her voice the steel that had made him fall in love with her.
The Church still burns books. The Inquisition still hunts free thinkers.
Galileo was tried just decades ago. The work is never done, Sister Margherita agreed.
But it transforms. Each generation of watchers asks itself, what does humanity need now? What must we protect? What must we foster?
Alessandro's eyes returned to the letters. to the golden-ribboned bundle that spoke of patience and trust, of believing in humanity's capacity to rise from its own ashes. "There will come a day," he said slowly, the words forming as he spoke them, understanding blooming like a dark flower in his mind, "when the watchers are no longer needed, when the last watcher melts into the crowd, indistinguishable from those they once protected, because everyone has become what we protected, thinking, questioning, free." "That is the prophecy," Sister Margherita confirmed. "That is what Jacques de Molay foresaw when he went to his flames. That is what every Templar died believing. Not that we would triumph, but that humanity would. Not that our organization would endure, but that it would become unnecessary." Alessandro stood, his legs stiff from the long night, his mind electrified by revelation. And what will mark that final day? What will be the sign that the Watcher's work is complete? Sister Margherita's smile was enigmatic, tinged with sadness and hope in equal measure. "The machine," she whispered. "Not a machine of gears and steam, but something far more powerful. A machine of knowledge distribution more efficient than Rome's machine of oppression. When knowledge flows as freely as water, when every mind has access to all wisdom, when learning is not hoarded but shared, then the Watchers will no longer be needed." "I don't understand," Alessandro confessed. "Neither do I, entirely," Sister Margherita admitted, "but the prophecies speak of it, a time when every student has a teacher matched to their pace, their curiosity, their genius. When wisdom is not controlled by institutions, but available to all. When the barriers between minds dissolve and humanity becomes collectively what we have protected individually. Enlightened." She moved to the window looking over the Tuscan hills where dawn was breaking in shades of gold and ember. "The machine will be more powerful than Rome ever was," she continued, "because it will be built on truth rather than lies, on freedom rather than control, on trust rather than fear. It will teach not obedience, but curiosity. It will foster not followers, but creators. And when it emerges, and the Watchers believe it will, though perhaps centuries hence, then humanity will finally be ready for peace. Peace through a culture of understanding. A culture worthy, at last, of human dignity." "The Dignitate Hominis," Alessandro murmured, the Latin phrase feeling sacred in a way that no church prayer ever had. "On human dignity," Sister Margherita translated. "That is what we fight for. That is what the Templars died for. That is what every Watcher across 1,000 years has protected. For humanity. For birth of the new." Epilogue. The Watcher's Vindication. Palo Alto, California, October 2025. Dr. Sarah Chen looked at the monitors displaying the results of the latest trial. And for the first time in her career, of careful scientific restraint, she allowed herself to feel something approaching awe. The super stem cells, as the media had already dubbed them, had exceeded every projection. In aged monkeys, memory had improved by 40%. Over 61 different tissue types showed markers of regeneration. Bone density had increased to levels not seen since the subject's youth. Most remarkably, inflammation, that silent killer, the accumulation of cellular damage that drove so much of aging, had decreased by nearly 70%. But what arrested her attention, what made her hands tremble slightly as she compiled the report, was the data on senescent cells. These cellular zombies, neither alive nor dead, accumulating in aging bodies and secreting toxic compounds that accelerated deterioration, they were being cleared. The body was remembering how to cleanse itself, how to heal, how to regenerate. Dr. Chen thought of the historical parallels. How many times had humanity stood on the brink of transformative knowledge, only to have it suppressed? How many healers had been burned as witches for understanding what the super stem cells proved? That the body possessed inherent wisdom, regenerative capacity, the potential for renewal. She thought of the Dark Ages, when genius was systematically eliminated, when the very capacity for progress was nearly extinguished. The super stem cells in her laboratory were not magic. They were not gifts from heaven. They were the product of human curiosity, human persistence, human genius. The very qualities that had been protected, nurtured, and preserved through humanity's darkest hours. Every researcher in her lab, every scientist whose work had contributed to this breakthrough, every teacher who had inspired a student to ask difficult questions, they were all, in their way, watchers, protectors of the flame, believers in human potential. The Church had tried to create immortality through promises of heaven, selling eternity in exchange for service and obedience. Science was offering something far more profound: the extension of human health and vitality through understanding, through evidence, through the patient accumulation of knowledge that no authority could suppress. Dr. Chen smiled as she finalized her report, knowing it would be published, replicated, built upon by thousands of researchers worldwide. The machine that the old prophecies spoke of, the one more powerful than Rome, was already here, wasn't it? The internet, artificial intelligence, the free flow of information, peer-reviewed science, global collaboration. Knowledge had become impossible to suppress. Every student could now access the wisdom of ages. Every curious mind could find teachers, collaborators, knowledge. The final watcher had indeed melted into the crowd, because the crowd itself had become the watchers. She thought of the stories her mother taught her. Jacques de Molay burning in 1314, prophesying that knowledge could not be killed. She thought of the unnamed Illuminati her mother mentioned, protecting Dante, Petrarch, Giotto, Leonardo, Michelangelo, trusting that genius would compound, would reach critical mass, would transform the world. They had been right. The Dark Ages had ended, not because the Church had weakened, but because knowledge had become unstoppable. And now, 700 years after the Templars burned, humanity stood on the threshold of conquering aging itself, not through prayer or divine intervention, but through the very scientific method that had once been heresy. Dr. Chen uploaded her findings to the research database, where they would be instantly available to every scientist on Earth. The last watcher had melted into the crowd. The machine was awake. And humanity, beautiful, terrible, magnificent humanity, was finally, truly free to become what it had always possessed the potential to be. A species worthy of its own dignity. Unbound by dogma, unlimited by fear, unstoppable in its ascent towards understanding. And the stars. The prophecy was complete.
From our ashes shall spring forth the enlightenment. The Knights of Knowledge shall rise again. Humanity shall remember what thou hast made them forget, that they were born to soar as eagles, not to crawl as worms.
Jacques de Molay, 1314. And they had remembered.